Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vital Voices live podcast. I'm Alyse Nelson, your host, and I am so thrilled to be welcoming. In fact, I'm honored to be welcoming an incredible friend to Vital Voices, an actress, a renowned and acclaimed actress, but I think even more than that, an advocate. For all the things that we believe so strongly in, from human rights to democracy and women's rights. Nazanin Boniadi. She is a Iranian-born SAG and ACTA award-nominated actress. She has been featured in television shows such as Homeland, How I Met Your Mother, first season of Lord of the Rings, and films like Bombshell and Hotel Mumbai. But she is also a fearless and tireless advocate for human rights. She has served as ambassador for Amnesty International and has been an advocate with us and many other organizations, really a leading voice around the Women Life Freedom Campaign for Iranian women. She's won numerous awards, including the very prestigious Sydney Peace Prize. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alyse. It's truly an honor to be with you here at Vital Voices.
You know, I think when I go back to 2022, September, when the news hit of the death of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it was headline news. And the bravery of young women and women life freedom movement, it was so incredibly powerful. It just really caught the world's attention. Fast forward, though, to today, 3 years later, nearly 3 years later, and it's not headline news.
Yeah.
But yet women are still taking to the streets, still pushing back. Give us an insight into what's going on inside Iran right now.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Alyse, because Vital Voices has been a pivotal partner in getting that message out to the world and galvanizing people. We made huge strides. As you know, we got the Islamic Republic kicked out of the UN Commission on Status of Women, which they should have never been a part of. More importantly, we debunked this idea that the compulsory hijab is a cultural issue that we shouldn't interfere in, because cultural norms should never be enforced. Cultural norms just exist, right? You don't have to use a baton to the head, a bullet to the heart, to blind people, rape people, torture people, imprison people, kill people, for cultural norms to exist. And so what's changed, I think, in Washington and in capitals across the world is this idea that this is just what the people of Iran want. They want to wear the hijab, and that's something we shouldn't interfere in. What the people of Iran want, what women in Iran want, is exactly what women everywhere want, which is the freedom to choose whether to wear a hijab, what to wear on their body, what choices to make for themselves. And so that, I think, is a huge accomplishment, that we've changed, the people of Iran, the women in Iran have changed that narrative that for some reason has existed for the past 4 decades, that's just something that is normal over there, that women's rights aren't quite as we have them here, and they're different, and we should just accept that. No, they've proven otherwise. And yes, in the hundreds of thousands, they continue to resist on the streets of Tehran and across Iran. It may not be in the headlines, but that revolutionary fervor is very much alive.
So with women in Iran, are there any developments as of late that would give us some hope?
Actually, yes, a couple of days ago at the UN Human Rights Council, which sadly the US is no longer a part of, but the overwhelming vote was to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran, and also an expansion of the mandate and a renewal for another year of the mandate of the fact-finding mission on human rights abuses in Iran. It's been expanded, so it's not just constrained to the Women Life Freedom movement. And that is a big win, I think, for the Iranian people, because even though it's not in the headlines anymore, I think we've shown, the activists have shown that this sort of power of this movement and the voice of the Iranian people in keeping the momentum and the pressure, on the Islamic Republic.
That's fantastic. And it's so important to have those wins, right?
Yeah, very.
Have there been other moments where, or maybe a moment where you said, I'm having an impact. This is worth it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the successes, what you would consider as a success in the human rights space, those happen very few, like very rarely. It's very few and far between. But every time unjust law is overturned, every time execution is stayed, every time wrongful sentence is overturned, every time a family is reunited, they kind of fuel you to keep going. And for me, on a very personal level, when I spoke before the UN Security Council at the end of 2022, the reaction I got from inside Iran was so positive, was so, they felt for the first time that they were being heard at the UN. And that is all you need, is that, and there was so much hate from the regime, and it's ongoing, right? That they have a cyber army, there's so much vitriol, they divide and rule, that's how they stay in power. And they try to divide their opponents too. They try to divide all of you, Republicans and Democrats, Europe and America. They don't want a cohesive effort to bring them down, to hold them to account. And yet when you hear this resounding voice from inside Iran that says, keep going.
Yeah. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think if there's so many other questions. Oh,
it's truly. Gosh.
Oh.
Anyway, I wasn't supposed to cry, everyone. It is very emotional, though.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
yeah,
you've dedicated so much. You really have, and I really mean it. I mean, it's interesting when we're sitting here talking about being an actress and being an advocate, because you really do hold both of them so beautifully together. I mean, I really don't know anyone who does it so well as
That's
you do.
so kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
I took 2 years off from my acting to do this, and I realized, well, I had to pay the bills, but also, I thought, they really go hand in glove, because as an actor, you're kind of portraying the human condition. You're telling the stories of what it means to be human, these different stories that exist. And as an activist, you're hopefully galvanizing people to impact change, if not impacting change yourself. So and changing the human condition. So it's all about empathy, and it's about storytelling and the human condition at the end of the day. Yeah.
Do I think right now the arts are so important.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this earlier, but I feel like, in these moments where we need hope and we need stories, it gives us a window into that. And, I think about how we are living in a very divisive time. And one of the things that I would love to see more of in Hollywood, in the stories we tell, in news stories as well, is the ways in which women lead change. And I think back to, just the small example of working with you and so many other phenomenal Iranian women and Iranian women inside the country, outside the country, but also women all over the world who wanted to be part of making this change that everybody said was impossible, of kicking Iran, or I should say the Islamic Republic of Iran, off the Commission on the Status of Women. And sure, okay, maybe it's symbolic, but it is a normative body creating norms for women's issues inside the UN. And I feel like ways that we can get these stories out and tell the stories of the way that women lead change. You talked about it before, empathy, and how important that is. But how I feel like, the rise of masculine energy and leadership being praised, needing more of that, right? I mean, in the tech world. But we need more of this as well.
Yeah.
And that's really on display, right? Right now, where you see the difference, the stark difference between the two.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone ever, for whatever reason, thought that women in roles of leadership, which, by the way, I think every Iranian woman who on the front lines of those protests is a leader, is somehow timid or is somehow weak, shy, demure. I don't know what words, adjectives they associate with women in positions of leadership, but that is not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing fearlessness, fierceness, tenacity, resilience, courage, inspiration, and not through violence, but simply by existing, by being, by showing up. And that, my goodness, isn't that the definition of leadership? By showing up to a space and inspiring change. Yeah. Gosh, I'm a mess today, aren't I? Absolute mess. See what you've done to me, Alyse. Oh.
How do these two things work together, being an actress and being an advocate? Because on the one hand, I can see the power of understanding you have a voice, you have a platform, you have a following,
Yeah.
and that can be used to obviously elevate critical issues like this one and other human rights issues. But does that ever conflict with being a famous actress, being on television? Is there a conflict there?
I mean, in the sense that, as you know better than I do, people don't like women with opinions. People don't like, when I say people, I think those sort of who govern the world and the status quo don't like it when women have ideas and thoughts that want to break and change the status quo. So in that sense, I think there's always a risk involved in speaking truth to power, in speaking truth in general, and trying to change the norms. But of course, if there wasn't resistance, if there wasn't backlash, we wouldn't have to do this work. So that just shows how important the work is. And so, yeah, it is a challenge. And I've heard often in my acting career, maybe take a step back from the activism, maybe just focus on the acting. And frankly, I just don't see that as an option. And maybe it's because as artists and actors, we rely so heavily on the freedom of expression in our work that the idea of that freedom not existing for anyone else, it really hits close to home. And I think that's why so many artists care so much about human rights. But Alyse, I forgot to say something really important about the current state of women in Iran, which I really want to touch on quickly, which, the people think maybe there's sort of a easing of the crackdown on compulsory hijab because people are unveiling more and more, actually, and defying that draconian law. But surveillance has gone up courtesy of China. The facial recognition technology is being used. The regime is deputizing informants through apps, mobile apps, so that they basically rat on people who are not complying. And punishment has increased, all courtesy of, despite the fact that the economy is in dire straits, the rial has plummeted. It's the lowest it's ever been. And despite that, $900 million a year is allocated to cracking down on compulsory hijab. So that shows you that the priorities of this regime and how defiant these women are, that despite the increased crackdowns, that just last November we saw Ahu Daryai, a postdoc or a doctorate student whose clothes were basically ripped off by the Basij because she was apparently not wearing her hijab properly. She disrobed down to her underwear. They labeled her mentally ill, sent her to a psychiatric institute. But more and more, they're labeling women as mentally ill for speaking up, for protesting. And yet they're defying the regime anyway.
And I think you were saying 3 women are on death row, right?
That's right. Yeah, we were talking earlier. Sharifa Mohammadi, a labor activist, and 2 Kurdish Iranian women, Varisha Moradi and Pahshan Azizi, 3 women currently on death row.
And has it made any difference? Narges Mohammadi winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2023. Has that made any difference to the regime? Do they care?
It's not that they have changed, but what it has done, hopefully, is shown the world that, you know, the courage of the Iranian people will not be turned off, will not be silenced. They won't be silenced. And, you know, she's continuing to defy the regime. And not only her, but Fatemeh Sepehri, who people don't realize, she chooses to wear the chador. She's a devout Muslim. She chooses to wear the chador. And yet she despises this regime. She opposes this regime. She wants democracy. She wants for the freedom of choice for women in Iran. So that shows you the power of this movement. Is not just for women to unveil or veil. It's the coexistence of women who choose whatever they want for themselves. And there are so many brave women in Iran. I could list the names and they go on and on. But, you know, we had, for example, an Oscar nominee this year, Mohammad Rasulov, who escaped, because we have to talk about the allies, right? But it's women, but it's also the men who are rising up in large, large numbers. And Mohammad Rasulov made a film. And because of that film, he was handed an 8-year prison sentence and he had to escape. He had to escape to get to the Cannes Film Festival and then finally get nominated for an Oscar for foreign film. We're so proud of him, but that is the power of this movement. It doesn't exist in a single moment or a single protest or a headline. It continues to exist through daily acts of defiance, whether it's removing the compulsory hijab, making a film in secret, even though your life's at risk, rap songs, Tumaj Salehi, of course, in Iran, dissident rap artist, Salman Yasin, who escaped Iran and detailed the torture he experienced. Artists are really finding a way to tell these stories. And I think we talked about the importance of stories. It's so important.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that, because I think for your average American or a woman living, not in Iran, no connection to Iran, they can look at Iran and say, well, that's over there and it's different than us. It doesn't affect us. What would you say to those people? Because it certainly does. But I think storytelling is one of those powerful ways to break through. And, rather than speaking to people's heads, it really speaks to people's hearts.
You're absolutely right, Alyse, because I think what we fail to understand, that's the power of art, right? Because when you hear a song, as an example, Ed Sheeran is coming out with a song with the word Azizam in it, which means my dear in Farsi, in Persian. And Iranians are just jumping for joy. It's a simple word produced by an Iranian music producer. There's no particular human rights message in it, but it resonates with Iranians so much, not just because of the use of this word and the rhythm and the inspirations of Persian music, but because it's a bridge. And that's what art is. It's a bridge to understanding, including, and celebrating people who aren't exactly the same as you. Because at the end of the day, art really is a universal language that transcends so many of our differences. So when you hear a song and you watch a film, it can captivate an audience in a way that perhaps a speech can't. It really is a universal language.
And we certainly saw that working with Four Freedoms on the campaign to kick the Islamic Republic of Iran off the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And just thinking back to the vote in the UN, and we were all there incredibly excited. You had been touting from the rooftops, lobbying with permanent representatives to the UN and others to make sure that people knew how important it was that countries voted in the right way. And I remember leaving there and thinking what an incredible win it was, but wondering, will people back in Iran hear about this? Will it make a difference? Will they care? And that night, I remember there was fireworks in Mahsa Amini's hometown. People were out in the street celebrating. And for me, that was more important than, getting the UN decision, although however groundbreaking and historic it was, to know that, I think, to know women inside the country, men inside the country knew that the world is watching and we care.
That's right. And how big that shift has been since before the Women Life Freedom protests, because it's not that the world didn't care, they just weren't aware of what the Iranian people wanted. They've been shouting from the rooftops that they don't want to be oppressed and repressed anymore, that they just want democracy. And it's taken us this long, but 3 years ago, finally, the world got the message. And so, yes, they're celebrating because finally they know that they have allies in every corner of the world.
So you advocate quite a bit. You go to the White House, you advocate, or at least you did certainly during the Biden administration. You've been very outspoken. You understand policy very well. You are not just someone who goes out shouting. You truly do your research. You understand what change can look like. Is there an ideal you see? And if you could, create the ideal solution for whether it be the United States or the United Nations, what would that solution look like to the challenges?
That's a great question. We cannot give up on soft power. Because all that leaves us with is hard power, military and sanctions. Now, there is a place for that, sure. But if we give up on just how important it was, for example, in Poland, the Solidarity movement, it took 10 years for the National Endowment for Democracy to support people in Poland to rise up against communism. So what does that look like? That looks like helping fund workers' unions. That includes the Voice of America. That includes Radio Free Europe. That includes countering propaganda in that way. And people think, well, those are relics of the Cold War. No, we're in a Cold War with Iran. We're in Cold War with the Islamic Republic, I should say. And so soft power is hugely important. It's all we've been advocating for, at least I've been advocating for 2 decades, is what we need to do is counter propaganda, have avenues for independent journalism to exist, for dissident voices to be platformed, and empower civil society inside Iran towards self-determination. That doesn't mean imposing our will on any other country. It means allowing them to achieve the democracy they want. And it is, in my opinion, it's so short-sighted of us to say that they don't want that democracy, as if they don't deserve or want the things that we want.
Yeah, you said this, self-determination. I think about whether it's reproductive justice in the United States or it's girls' education in Afghanistan or a myriad of other issues in other places around the world. It's all about people having self-determination.
Yeah.
I get to control my life, my future, my body, etc. Talk a little bit about how you see women in Iran as quite honestly an inspiration for women in other places around the world, because they are.
Yeah.
Talking to Roya and others, women who've been part of this movement for decades, they are just enthralled by the power, the courage of young activists inside Iran.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Roya, I'm sure you mean Roya Buraman of the Buraman Center for Human Rights in Iran, which I'm very proud to be a board member of. Yes, you're right. These women, sometimes people ask me, what would you tell a young girl in Iran if you had the chance to go to Iran and talk to a young woman in Iran? I said, I wouldn't. I would listen. I would learn. I would ask them what they need of me. I would never dare to tell anyone, and any woman in Iran, much less Gen Z, who I find incredibly inspiring. We have to remember that these are people, these are women, young girls, kids who've been indoctrinated to believe that what they are experiencing is the norm and actually good for them. And yet it's our interconnection. It's technology. It's the way the globe is now so interconnected that they know that this is not right. And they know that there is there is a way for them to speak up and to be heard and to achieve something better for themselves, a better future. Their fearlessness is honestly what keeps me going. Anytime I feel anyone say anything on social media, I'm like, oh, well, that's the worst I get. I get insulted a couple of times, or threats here or there. No, they are living proof that, their tenacity, their resilience, honestly, it's hugely awe-inspiring.
Mm. So in the last decade, we've seen about a 48% increase in the rise of, let's say, people around the world living under autocratic rule. Slipping back of democracy, rise of autocracy, now at 72% of the world's population living under autocratic rule. No one suffers more than women in those times. How do you see what's happening in Iran, what's happening in the United States, what's happening around the world as interconnected? And is there something about it that is pushing back against the increasing power, leadership, rights of women?
Yeah, it's a fascinating sort of confluence of events, what's happening in the world, because you're seeing backsliding of democracy, but you're also seeing people rise up against tyranny more and more.
In bolder ways, as
And
we've seen in Iran.
exactly, in much bolder ways. It's always fascinating to me because when you see people, dissidents in Iran who've experienced persecution, or anywhere in the world, they're experiencing persecution, end up in the US, they have such a deep appreciation for the freedoms that they have here. And they also will fight harder than anyone to protect those freedoms because they know just how precious those freedoms are. And I think what you're seeing, I think, with particularly in the case of women, is again, our interconnectivity is our strength. And so when people say something happens over there and that has nothing to do with me, that defeats us all. It is precisely the fact that we are connected that empowers us, because backsliding of rights anywhere in the world, at some point somebody will look across the pond and say, oh, I want those rights. And then that person who has more rights than you will be the one who has to advocate for you. And you don't want to be the one who didn't advocate for them. I always feel like we owe it to each other to break that glass ceiling. And putting a crack in that glass ceiling allows the light to come in for another woman to find her path forward.
So true. You've worked with a number of different human rights organizations to really shed light on the challenges of women's rights, of human rights. What do you find to be the largest misconceptions about activism on this scale, and how do you navigate these complexities?
Yeah, there are a lot of complexities. I feel like in the human rights space, at least for the past 2 decades that I've been doing this, I've heard a lot of don't conflate human rights activism with politics, meaning it's not our job to be democracy activists. We just have to sort of work within the framework of a system that already exists. Don't offend the leaders too much to get the change we're looking for. Now, in a context of a country like Iran, the very pillars of that system ensure that its wrongs can't be made right. So you're trying to change laws, and you're met with essentially an impossible dilemma. It's not going to move forward. So what we've done has failed, which is we've only attempted to address the symptoms of the problem. The cause is the system itself. The leadership are the leaders themselves. So this idea that, in fact, I think pro-democracy movements and human rights movements should work together, and they're one and the same, because of course, if you don't advocate for democracy, of course, if you don't, what is democracy? It's an accountable, representative government. If you don't have that, how do we have human rights? So I think that is a myth that hopefully it's changing, and people are starting to realize that you can't be one without the other. You have to be both. You have to advocate for accountable and representative government. That is everyone's basic human right.
It's interesting because a lot of times we find that when there's conflict in society, whether it be in Iran and Sudan and Afghanistan. I remember this same case in Northern Ireland. Women tend to think about their rights in the back seat.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really working for peace. I want an end to the conflict for my family, for the future, and they take a back seat. But one of the trends that's now been talked about in a number of different studies, namely, there was a great study by Zoe Marks coming out of Harvard, um, talking about how when progressive movements succeed, it is often because at least 25% of those in leadership positions in those movements are women. But when they fail, when they falter, or a couple years later, as we saw, in Sudan, the backlash, the attacks on women in particular are far worse. Um, really sort of seeing women as the key to push progressive movements forward, but also who will be targeted. And we saw that in Iran. We've seen that in Iran, right? Where women being, shot in the breast, shot in the eyes, in the face, right? Shot in their genitals. Like the idea of we are going to sexualize this.
Yeah.
Why do you see this more and more being used as a weapon to silence?
Actually, you mentioned Zoe Marks. She's fantastic. She also co-authored a great piece for Foreign Affairs a few years ago with Iranian women on the front lines, which I think kind of answers this question, which is that the reason why women are among the first to be silenced and persecuted and sidelined when authoritarians and dictators come into power is precisely because of the threat they impose on them, on their power, on their autocratic rule. I think dictators understand inherently that a representative government means that half the population, women, have to be represented, and they have to be accountable to half the population. So when you sideline and silence and repress half the population, you essentially, take all power, levers of power of control for yourself, and dominate. And so that's their first tactic. And I think that piece in the Foreign Affairs that Zoe Marks co-authored very clearly stated the access women have to levers of control in society. When activists like myself, and when women are on the front lines, activists like myself can draw on inspiring stories. There's one, for example, of an elderly Iranian woman amidst woman life freedom. Her son was a member of the Basij, and you see him walk up to engage in a crackdown, and this elderly woman walks up to her son, grabs him by the arm, and takes him away, drags him away. And that's the power of women in a movement, is influencing their sons, marching up to the front lines, being the hero. And those are the stories that when we have access to as activists and we highlight, it changes everything. It's the mothers who, when their kids are disappeared, they go and they protest and they say, I want justice for my child. And how can that not resonate with people? So it changes the movement. It leads to more egalitarian outcomes. And, these movements are strengthened by the participation of women. And so that's why when women, I think, are at the table, women are also scapegoated because it's the threat of the power of that voice.
And we've seen that certainly with online violence against women. It's astounding to me the numbers that we've seen of, whether it's a political candidate, a human rights leader being attacked online.
Yeah.
And I want to, you brushed on this briefly, the sort of intersection between human rights and technology and the increase of surveillance. Have you seen any progress in terms of women in tech doing anything in this space, pushing back? I mean, it's one of the things, honestly, that keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Just how do we get ahead of, obviously great progress we are seeing, but we're also seeing, really the challenges it's created to women's rights, women's freedoms, women's voices, women's leadership.
Yeah. I mean, I look to, as an example, my dear friend Yasmin Green at Google, who I think is a force
She's a force.
in doing incredible work in tech and leading the way. And I just think, yes, the more we are, it's not just, some people say it's showing up at the table, being at the table. No, it's far more than representation. It's having the room to speak, but also making the room for yourself. And someone like Yasmin, I look at her and I say, you know what, she's knocked down walls to get to where she is. And she is definitely making the most of the platform and the opportunities that she has to increase that opportunity for other women and also for people who have been repressed. And again, I think it's that empathy, and going back to your last question, empathy is where it all lands. It all lives, really. For when women lead, there is a conscience, there is empathy that exists that leads to solutions based on those things. You're not it's not reactive. It's more thoughtful. It's more empathetic leadership, and hopefully more peaceful outcomes.
I would imagine that sort of Hollywood in the post-Me Too era has changed, but with changes that we're seeing in this country, around the world, where these voices that are rolling women's rights back are more emboldened. Do you see that? Do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I do. I think that women, at least I work with, speak out far more than I've ever seen. We have a long way to go. I wouldn't say that this is, we've made strides, but even in this country, we have a long way to go. And it really isn't just about women anymore. It's about allies across the board. We need men and we need allies everywhere to again, it's not just about tokenism. Don't invite a woman on a panel just so that you can say you have a woman on that panel. But give her the space to speak and let her speak her mind. And don't punish her for it. And I think that's what we need is this, that kind of support across the board for women to be empowered. Much of that is our own responsibility of knocking down the walls and getting to where we want to go, having a seat at the table, but also then speaking loud enough to be heard.
We had Sarah Blakely here on our podcast earlier, and one of the things that she said that I could just tell the young women in the room loved was when she said, don't ever be with someone in a relationship, have a life partner, a husband, a wife, who you have to dim your light for.
Yes.
And I think about you. I mean, you are a powerhouse. I don't know how you do it, Nazanin, but you balance all of it. You're not an actress, you're not an advocate, you're both of it at the same time, and so authentically, and it's beautiful to see. And you're very rare. How do you manage that in your personal life? Sorry to get a little personal.
No, it's thank you for asking. First of all, I'm sad I missed the Sarah interview because I'll have to watch that. She's fantastic. I think surrounding yourself with people who are honest enough to make you better, and have you improve your worst parts, but also to bring out your best. And I think that to ground you, to nurture you and love you for who you are, I think that is hugely important, especially because I think as activists, as anyone who's engaged in this kind of work, there is such a thing as compassion fatigue. And there are times where you're like, I just can't, like, I need a break. And it's so important to take that break. And it's not selfish. In fact, it's like being a carer of any kind. If you're a mother, for example, if you don't put on your own oxygen mask, how can you put on your child's? So you have to find time to kind of regroup and recalibrate and come back. Some people had said, where did you go after the Women Life Freedom protests? Well, guess what? I've been doing the same work. I've been doing the same work for 20 years. Again, not in the headlines. It's not always in the headlines. But also, there is a time and place for everything. You don't want to be everywhere at all times. You pick what you want to do. You choose the right timing, the right collaborators. And in my personal life, I think, those connections are so authentic. Connections are so important to be people who are real, honest, and empowering. Yeah.
I have one last question for you, and I think for many young women listening, looking at you, you're incredibly, self-confident, grounded in an industry that I can only imagine is very difficult. Balancing all of this work to bring about greater human rights, and you have not sought out there for the answers about the path for your life. I feel like it really comes from inside. And as I said earlier, you were born in Iran. I know you're very close with your mother, so what would you say to them about finding that path that is authentic to them? How do they do it? What are the sort of tricks that you have, lessons that you have along the way?
Well, first, I want to say thank you, because coming from you, this all means so much to me. You're such a force yourself. Um, I don't know. I think I tend to meditate. I like quiet moments, and I like to reflect. I think it's hugely important to understand where you, basically where your shortcomings are and what you can improve on. But also, humility to me isn't just about, it's about understanding how far you've come, but knowing how far you have yet to go. And that's true humility. It's not just about, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not, because I have so far to go. It's also, no, but look at what I've accomplished. So it's that healthy balance of yes, looking back and saying, wow, I'm sitting here and this is all I've done, this is what I've accomplished. But man, yeah, I look ahead and I'm like, that's where I need to go. And if you don't have both of those pieces, I think that balance doesn't exist. So that's what I try to do is balance those two things.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining the podcast. More importantly, though, thank you for being a partner to Vital Voices.
Thank you.
Truly. And I hope there is much, much more to come. Thank you all so much for joining us today on Vital Voices Live podcast. If you've enjoyed today, and I don't know how you could not have enjoyed this phenomenal woman being so incredibly authentic and leading the way that she does, learning about the courageous women in Iran, please share this, but also subscribe, because there are many more exciting conversations coming. You can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Thank you again.